it's like, what is happening? Why did this happen? Hello and welcome back to A Random Librarian here on YouTube. Today is the July wrap-up for what I read in the month of July. So I guess let's dive right into it. It doesn't really need much more of an introduction than that. It's probably just gonna be out of order, but that's okay. So first things first, July was Disability Pride Month, so I finally picked up the Brown Sisters and I read all three. These were super fun, super light. I really like the couples in all of them. I really love all three of the Brown sisters. If we could get a spin-off series about like Brown cousins or cousins with their mother's maiden name, I'd be so all over that. I know that Talia Hibbert does have a great back catalog as well, so I'm sure there's plenty more to read in her style and in her voice. Let's see. So the reason that I picked these up for Disability Pride Month, if you haven't heard of these before, I don't know where you've been hiding, but Chloe Brown is a chronically ill main character. Eve and Jacob, who are the couple of the third book, are both on the autism spectrum. Jacob was diagnosed as a kid and Eve has never been officially diagnosed, but kind of comes to terms with the fact that she might be or is autistic on the page, which is something that I've never really seen before in a book. So I really loved that. And then finally we have Danny. This is the second book in the series. I love Danny. She's an academic. She has severe commitment issues and her love interest Zaf is a huge champion for mental health, especially in young men. So that was just really lovely to see as well. Zaf struggles with anxiety and depression after a loss that we don't see on the page, but we see his process of grief. So I also really loved in the author's note of what to look for and if there are any triggers in the stories that could, you know, cause the reader some stress. So I really, really loved these and I'm joining the ranks of people who do. So these are very fun. I'm giving these away on Instagram right now, so it's probably going to be done by the time I post this video. Whoops. Then I also read Disability Visibility is a collection of first-person narratives of disabled writers, authors, activists, people, essentially, because 1 in 5 people in the United States live with a disability, and it's really underrepresented in media. This definitely has, just a lot of experience and therefore a lot of trauma, but also a lot of joy. It's a very powerful collection of stories and I really just think that this should be a required reading for everybody, disabled or not. On a different note, I finally read The Bridge Kingdom, which I guess is about to be a much bigger series than just these 2 books. I kind of bought them thinking that it was just a duology because those are quicker to finish than long fantasy series. But here we are. So The Bridge Kingdom is, I'm trying to figure out if it's speculative or fantasy, because it's not like there's any magic or anything. But it's not set in the past that we have or like any known part of the, I'm just gonna call it fantasy. So this is the map of the Bridge Kingdom. So we have a couple of like 4 different kingdoms on either side, and then in the middle here this is a bridge on different islands, and this is the Bridge Kingdom. So if you haven't seen this series around, it really I saw it blow up on TikTok. This follows Lara, who grew up in this like spy slash super soldier slash kind of Red Widow-y camp with all of her half-sisters, because her father is the king and instead of having like one queen, he has a harem of women, and she and all of her sisters are brought up in this really traumatizing way where they are trained to be the best at everything. So like poison, fighting, politics, they're all like beautiful and like dance and do stuff that like princesses would normally do, but they're also just extremely deadly because their dad and their kingdom is in a treaty with the Bridge Kingdom, and he's basically creating the perfect traitor, the perfect spy to infiltrate the Bridge Kingdom get messages out to their home kingdom so that their father can take over, essentially, because the bridge is where trade happens. And of course, there's all this intrigue of like, is what they learned growing up correct? Were they brainwashed? She starts falling in love with her new husband. And it's just, this one is a lot of like spy stuff and like getting to know the Bridge Kingdom. So it's I thought it was still good, but it definitely has like a lot of world building and tension. Like the last third of the book is just like don't send that letter, don't send that letter, don't send that letter. And then this one, which is the second book, The Traitor Queen, is way more action packed because like at the end of the book, we have, at the end of book 1, you know, big changes happen, and then book 2 is like grappling with this completely shifting, changing world and trying to figure out how to save everyone that she loves and get everyone that she loves to the end of this and undo any harm that might have been done in book 1. So I enjoyed these. I'm not sure I'm gonna keep going with the series once book 3 comes out, but they're fun, heavy. For some reason, these are like dense, even though they look like they're normal pages. But I'd recommend it, especially if you like knowing what all of the people are talking about on book tag. That's another series that I'm giving away on Instagram. Then I picked up this, which is The Gift. It's a short graphic novel about Anastasia, whatever, however you're actually supposed to say it. And I've loved Anastasia ever since the animated film came out when I was a kid. Dimitri does still own a part of my heart, and so does Anya for that matter. And this follows Anastasia after she gets a camera for her birthday, and it's kind of just unsettling. So it's all in this blue, like a cyanotype kind of blue, which is a way of making photos. But it never really, I'm not sure really what to make of it because we never get told who gave her the camera. The end is kind of unsettling, and I don't know if they're trying to be like, well, she survived but turned into like part of the land or what. But it's a very quick read, and if you're also kind of obsessed with what happened to Anastasia's family and Anastasia herself, it's very interesting. Next up, let's talk about Life After Life. So this book I actually first found out about when I was in one of my first library jobs of all time. I was shelving the audiobooks that were in CD form, and as a result of reading the back, I had a picture of that little square, very plasticky CD cover for the longest time. So I was like, I know I want to read it. I know I want to read it. And I finally bought a copy a couple years ago, and it's very thick. It's over 500 pages, and it follows Ursula Todd, who keeps living cyclically, essentially. So it starts with her birth, and in one version of the birth, the doctor doesn't arrive, the baby can't be saved, and then it starts over immediately after. And the doctor arrived, the baby gets delivered, and then it goes through a couple of years of her life, and then like at the end of each part, something will happen, darkness falls, and she starts over. But she doesn't really remember what happened. Sometimes she'll get like feelings of doom, and she'll do something drastic to change the outcome of what happened in the previous life, but she doesn't fully know. She just gets like deja vu. And it's very interesting. Some parts of it does get pretty repetitive because the changes aren't big changes, and they're not necessarily made early in the story. And I was a little frustrated with it because at the end you're left with the sense that Ursula's still in this cycle, and we don't know what she has to do in order to break it and like live live and die as like anyone should. I think It's more of a like rumination and a historical fiction novel than any kind of like sci-fi or fantasy or time travel adjacent. Because I think normally if you're reading something that has time travel, which I don't think this is necessarily time travel, normally in that case, there is a way to end the loop. There is, like in, well actually, Una Ever After is a time travel book that I read last year that I really enjoyed, and she's living her life out of order. So it's kind of similar to what Ursula's going through, but even though that one keeps going after the pages end, it's still just one lifetime, just broken up. So there is an end in sight, or like logically you know that there is an end because it's just her lifetime. This one, you're left feeling at the end that in 1910 through World War II, there's still just one woman who's constantly reliving her life. And there is one lifetime kind of in the middle of the book where I thought she did everything right. And I was like, oh, like how do I still have a couple hundred pages left? Like this feels like it should be the life that she gets to do, because it also, the question on the back is, what if you could live again and again until you got it right? And I was like, well, she got it right. So I don't know. It didn't quite live up to the hype that I had built for it in my own head, which is of course always my fault for doing so and having expectations, but I don't know. And I completely see why people love it. I do. It's beautifully written. The characters are compelling. The flaws of characters are center stage, and you know, we get to see Ursula change even after things that she doesn't remember, or she hadn't lived through in a certain timeline. Yeah, I don't know. It wasn't for me, but I can see why it is for other people. This one was the first book that I read of this month. I read it mainly last month and then finished it this month. And this is a book that I got as part of a read-along. So there were questions and conversations had in like a group chat on Instagram. And this is the first time I've read anything with an Amish set of characters. It follows Kate, who is the chief of police, Kate Burkholder, and she gets called to a scene where another ex-Amish woman that she grew up with has been murdered, and she has to figure out what happened. And there's a lot of twists and turns here. I think it is crafted very well. However, I guessed what the story was really early, but I guessed, and I like knew who killed her because of something that was later disproven. So that was like really frustrating for me, because I was like, but like I knew the answer, but then like the reason that I knew the answer isn't right. So it feels like you should have addressed that, and then I wouldn't have known the answer early. If that makes sense. But it is a really quick read, and I enjoyed it. It's just that thing that kind of tweaked my enjoyment a little bit. It was fun to read it with other people though, and this is book 19 in this series, so there's plenty of books to read if this is something that catches your fancy. Next up, not necessarily chronologically, but I did start the Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix, which originally came out in like the 1990s, and somehow I'd never heard of it until these beautiful new editions came out and someone talked about it on Book Talk, and I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. So Sabriel opens the series. It follows Sabriel, who is the daughter of the Abhorsen, who is a singular figure who kind of can work as a necromancer, but actually works to combat necromancers. So the dead are like free and roaming in the Old Kingdom, and it's the Abhorsen's job to send them back to death and like bind them there so that people get a death, and the necromancers who are trying to use the dead have to be like sealed there as well. And in doing so, they use bells. which I thought was really cool. Like, I've never seen that as a type of magic before, and just very, very interesting. And the world building in this is incredible as well. So this was like a great start to the story. There's definitely like high stakes. It's coming of age story because it's Sabriel. She starts the story at school, like at high school, and then immediately kind of has to become the Abhorsen and become this figure, this adult who knows what they're doing and is the only one who can really do what needs to be done. So it does kind of have the chosen one trope, but it's handled just in such a like realistic way. There's a quote from Philip Pullman on the front of all of these editions. It says, "A fantasy that reads like realism, created with invention, clarity, and intelligence." And I completely agree. And they're also just so pretty. Like, oh my goodness. I also have read book 2, and this is Lyriel, and I loved this even more than book 1 because Lyriel is a magical librarian with a talking dog for a companion, like as a best friend. She is part of the Clare, which is one of the like 5 major bloodlines of the Old Kingdom, and the Clare can see the future, but Lyriel herself cannot, and she's felt very isolated as a result, and kind of asks to be part of the library team, the library workers, become a librarian as a way of like having something to do, so she's not just like ruminating on what she can't. And then she and the disreputable dog, who is her best friend, go on adventures and like discover all of the hidden and closed doorways and parts of the magical library, and I love them both so much. And we get to see the rest of the kingdom as well. This takes place like 20 some odd years after Clariel. Clariel and Touchstone are the Abhorsen and the king of the Old Kingdom. They have 2 mostly grown children who are kind of in waiting to follow their footsteps. And there's a new big bad, or a new like evil, a system of evil even. I don't fully know. It's very like behind the scenes. We don't know yet what's happening at the end of this book. Luckily, I do have the next one. I'm either reading that today or next month. So I'm really excited. This one I think is the thickest of the books in this series. Yes, so it's like 540 something pages in this edition. These editions aren't on Goodreads or the Storygraph, so my page numbers are gonna be kind of off in terms of how many pages I've read, but it's whatever. I'm very excited to read the other 3 books in this series. It's 2 more that are part of the actual like Old Kingdom series, and then there's 1 book that is a prequel, which is Clariel, and then apparently Garth Nix is coming out with another prequel that follows the love story between Sabriel's parents. So that's coming out next year sometime, or maybe this fall. Pretty interesting. Then I also started another fantasy series, and that is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I have a box set for it, and I like this so much better than The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This feels kind of like old school fantasy in the same realm as the Garth Nix books I just talked about. It's 3 different Londons with a 4th London that's kind of succumbed to magic. There are 2 people who can kind of move between the Londons because one London doesn't have magic, one London has a kind of corrupted magic, and it's like a battle magic, and then Red London, which is where our main guy, Kel, is has more like elemental magic. And Kel is one of the few people who can travel between worlds and bring messages between the different rulers. And oh, I like it so much. I like it so much more. There are, of course, it's not like my favorite fantasy series of all time. Like I don't think I'm ever gonna be a V. Schwab fangirl, which I like always assumed I would be, to be honest. So that's kind of interesting to learn about myself. I'm never going to be, I think, a super fan, but I still enjoyed the series, and it's a lot darker than I was really expecting. I couldn't tell you why. I really couldn't tell you why. But there's like violence and bloodshed and death and just darkness. And it's very good. I finally finished Say Nothing, A True Story of Murder and Memory in Northern Ireland by Patrick Radden Keefe. This is a book that I picked up in hardcover because I was so intrigued by it. It opens actually in a library where I worked as an undergrad. So I went to Boston College, and the Boston College Rare Books Library caused a whole hullabaloo when they offered amnesty, or maybe not amnesty, but they offered to take the stories of people who committed atrocities in Northern Ireland during the Troubles and keep them safe until after the death of the participants of the study, which legally you cannot do. So this book kind of came about as a result of that, like the reason that we know now what happened to a lot of people who were disappeared, or a lot of people who were killed or lost during the Troubles. Like, we have this book which talks about so many of them and has pictures of so many of them, and just, it is so wild to me that this happened in the 70s. Like, this happened so recently. My parents also both read it. I gave them the hard copy, and then I bought this, and then one of them wanted to read this while the other one was reading the hard copy. So I finished the paperback, but everyone in my family is pretty much fascinated by this. I kind of have an accidental Irish studies minor. I think I've talked about this before on this channel, but when I was graduating from BC, it was 2016, which was 100 years since the Easter Rebellion of 1916. So we had like all of these scholars and all of this conversation around that uprising and like everything that followed. So kind of going back to something that I really enjoyed studying in college was very interesting. And that's been out for a while now, so I still recommend you pick it up. He also has a new nonfiction tome out about the opioid crisis in the US, and I'm on the wait list for that on Libby, and I'm really excited to read it when it gets in. He's an incredible writer, and just the research and work that goes into these books is mind-blowing. Next up, this was my least favorite book of this year, or actually, yeah, it might be of this year, but of this month specifically, and that is Master of Crows. So I saw this recommended on Book Talk, and I bought a whole bunch of books by this author because I saw them recommended, and I was having a bad day or something, I don't know. So it's fantasy for adults with like a little bit of spice. I was like, okay, that sounds fun. I'm gonna read you my review that I started when I was halfway through on Bookstagram. So there were like 5 big points that I just really dislike about this book. The first is like not really a thing, but it did get my attention a lot when I was reading. The main character's name is Martise, Martise, and I read that wrong every single time. Because I don't know if that's just because I work with French people, and there's a book series for young kids about Martine. So Martine, Martine, and my great aunt's name is Martina. And every single time I'd read it, I'd either read Martine or Maryse, Maryse, and I was like, what is this name? Martise? No! So that, not a big deal, but it gets worse from there. Silhara, who is the Master of Crows, who's a magic guy who doesn't subscribe to the rules of the like brotherhood of magic users. Yes. He keeps audibly and noticeably sniffing her, and then he describes it as like insert something nice smelling and warm female, which just makes it sound like she has BO. But also like that exact wording at least like 4 or 5 times, and I was just like, oh my god, stop it, that doesn't smell good. And also, warm female? Like, Mm-mm. Don't like it. Silhara, is also gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, with an added issue of him being one bad day away from becoming the host to a god that wants to raise the earth and install his avatar as like ruler thereof. Because he's supposed to be helping Martise to access her magic and also to like control it and figure out what she can do with it. And instead, like once they get to the point where her magic is like alive, instead every time they try to do something with her magic, he ends up like eating it or like absorbing it or something along those lines, and then getting mad at her for not being able to control her magic. And it's like, dude, you're the one who has to teach her how to do that. She doesn't know how to do it. So you taking something that isn't yours is not her fault. You know? Ugh. And then this is the big one. The big one. So he gets very annoyed with the fact that he likes Martise because she's not attractive, but she has like this alluring voice that everyone comments on, and apparently her voice is enough to like make people lose it. And gross. So he's like annoyed. He has huge commitment issues and doesn't want to like her. So instead, he hires a sex worker, and she takes this as like a slap to the face because at this point they've like made out a bit and like she loves him, but he doesn't know that he feels anything for her. And long story short, he hires a sex worker and then magics said sex worker to look like Martise, as if that's romantic and not just absolutely fucked beyond measure. And like the sex worker is freaking out. She's like, what are you doing to me? He's like, oh, it's fine. It's gonna wear off. It's not like permanent or anything. And doesn't tell her what he's doing at all. She has no idea. And then it falls to this woman to kind of like hint to Martise that Silhara is interested. And it's like, what is happening? Why did this happen? And then this kind of just flows easily into part 5. But in general, in fantasy novels, if we could have less of the whole threatening sexual assault as a way to make women scared and as a way of showing that the fantasy world that we're in is very like dangerous and I don't know. If we could just do less of that on a whole, I'd be over the moon. Because if the author has enough imagination to create like a bonkers magical system, sometimes even like a magical system within a magical system, and an entire political landscape, like surely you have enough imagination to come up with something else, anything else than like rape, the threat of sexual violence, the threat against a woman that we see every day in the real world. I don't want that in my escapism. If we could just knock that out, I'd be very pleased. Also, like, anytime a male character is like, if I was going to rape you, I would have already done it. It's like, that's not comforting. You're not a good guy for saying that you haven't raped someone. That is the bare minimum, possibly below the bare minimum. Yeah, so this book made me heated. I finished it because I did want to know what happened. And the whole like introduction of like a god and like mage or magic-y order of priests. Very interesting. Also, Martise is very smart in like book form, not really when it comes to interpersonal relationships, but so I want to know what happened, but I do wish I hadn't read it. And lastly, of the physical books I have in front of me, I finally read the library book, and this is really a love letter to libraries. it bounces back and forth between like talking about librarians in the present day and the librarians who work at the LA Public Library, and going back to the fire that raged in the LA Public Library and whether or not it was arson. So I very much enjoyed this because it mixes things that I love, including true crime and librarianship, and you can just tell that Susan Orlean absolutely loves libraries as well. She talks about going to libraries all the time as a kid with her mom, and how her mom always said if she could pick any job in the world, she'd be a librarian. And like the whole creation of the book, even like that's in the back. I love that. It's just beautiful, like the whole thing, stunning. And yeah, oh gosh, it talks about library, like conferences and things, just things that I really miss about libraries. So reading this book right now was like the perfect time to do it. And then I am going to try to finish this More Miracle Than Bird by Alice Miller, which is following a young woman of, I think, like a certain like status, who is working as a nurse in a hospital during World War II, while also kind of flashing back to right before the war and attending like literary salons and meeting W.B. Yeats, and they have like kind of a thing going on. There's also, because it involves Yeats, there's also like mysticism, and she's part of like an order where they wear hoods and I think try to connect with the dead. One of her patients is in love with her. So I'm interested to see where it goes. It's historical fiction, but it has that little twist of like mysticism that I'm always interested in. So I'm either gonna read that today or A Person. This is what this one looks like. So pretty. And let's see, what else did I read? So on the audiobook only or graphic novel only, so that would have been through Libby. Things that I read include, I think I talked about Witchlight last month, so not that one. Oh my gosh, I forgot about this. I finally gave into the hype and read the first 2 books in the Planet Barbarians series, which, what the hell was that? They're very quick reads, I'll give them that, but Jesus. Why did those get so popular? Go on someone else's review on this because I fully don't even know what to say. Okay, next I read the graphic novel On a Sunbeam, which is so stunning. It's unreal. And this follows a crew of people in space on a really adorable spaceship where they are contracted to go and fix up beautiful buildings or make them stable again that people can inhabit them. And it also has a second storyline as one, it's like the newest member of the crew and her time at school, where she falls in love with another girl and then this girl disappears. So she's kind of living her life after losing the first love of said life and getting to explore all of these planets and going into the world. So where the 2 stories converge and what happens afterwards just made my heart so warm. So I definitely recommend this one, and the art is just so stunning. I also read, this time on Hoopla, Magic to Brew, which is another graphic novel series, and it takes place in a world where like magical creatures are the norm, and there's a magician going around and taking magic away. So for example, our main character, her best friend is a centaur, and the magician takes their legs, turns them into a human. It's interesting. I'm not sure if I want to pick up the next volume and continue on with the series or not, but I did very much enjoy reading it as it went through. It's very like high stakes, but still kind of comfortingly rendered. There are characters who are non-binary. Our main character is in a relationship with another woman. They're both werewolves. Yeah, and they all work in a coffee shop. So if you like cozy magic and mysteries, this I think could be it for you. Oof, I had an arc of this for the longest time, an e-arc, and I didn't read it because I'm a dummy, but I finally picked up Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, and oh my gosh, I understand why people love it so much. It's incredible. My one issue with the book is that they created this like early college program, which means that Bree is 16 and her love interests, possibly S, we don't know yet, are not 16. And even if they went through the early college system, they'd still be, I think, 18 or older. And that just feels weird to me. Like, why wouldn't you? I don't know why she didn't just make it so that they were all in, like, Bree was entering college and she could have been 18 and they could have been like a year or two older. I don't know. That's my one complaint. It just feels weird to have a high school student surrounded by all of these college students. That being said, all of the twists and turns in this is just incredible. I loved the way that Tracy Deonn took something that is predominantly seen through a white Anglo-Saxon lens, the legend and stories surrounding Arthur and the Round Table, and made it something that isn't just for white people anymore. Isn't just about white people anymore either, and it's so good. I was also in high school. I loved the show Merlin, and in that show they made Gwen, so Queen Guinevere, a black woman. So I think that we need more stories that follow the Arthurian legends, told from perspectives that are not completely and totally whitewashed. And this is an incredible start. And I think book 2 is coming like kind of soon, so I'm really excited for that. For audio, I did read Moonflower Murders by Anthony Horowitz. I read the first book of this a while back, and I like this one even better than the first one. It follows someone who used to work as an editor for books, and the author that she was like the primary editor for. In the first book, he is murdered and his manuscript is not finished, and she thinks that she can solve his murder if she solves the murder in the book. And this one, she ends book 1 in Greece with her fiance, maybe fiance, and they're running a hotel together. In this one, a couple who runs a hotel back in England comes to her with another of the novels written by the previous author and says, this book was based on us, and now our daughter has gone missing, and someone has told us that you can help us find her. So we still get that same book within a book that I really enjoy, because they're very different styles even. Like, it just shows that Anthony Horowitz is like a real talent when it comes to writing, because the novel inside of a novel is like a detective story, almost like Agatha Christie. And then it's very much contrasted with the modern day work that Susan is doing. And it's very fun. Ooh, this is one that I had to return, but I did have a physical copy from the library. Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon-Ha Lee. And this is a sci-fi fantasy book set in an Asian landscape. There is a mechanical dragon that has been like imbibed with a spirit and it's been created by artists. Our main character gets kind of recruited to work for the War Department as an artist. They are non-binary. Their sister is on the opposition against the conquerors. This is a story that's very fun to read, but it also has a lot to say about like the ethics of war, colonialism, gender politics, like so much gets said in this book, and it's also just very fun to read. I do have questions for the author about the ending. I haven't seen anything about this being the first in a series, and yeah. I don't know what to do now, but I really enjoyed that, and if you like fantasy and dragons and need more dragons in your life, I would say pick it up. Oh, next up, another one that I didn't like for similar reasons that I didn't like Master of Crows was Guild by Raven Kennedy. This is the first book in the Plated Prisoner series. It's another of those Kindle Unlimited series that are getting extremely popular on Book Talk. And this follows a golden woman who is part of a king's harem, and the king is King Midas. So the entire castle is golden. Everything's golden, including the main character, Orin, I think. And it's a lot of like political intrigue that we actually don't really see that much of because Orin is kept in a cage for the vast majority of this book. I think book one is a lot of world building because we see things from the point of view of a very unreliable narrator. Orin has been like kept as a pet essentially for years and years and years. She's been kept in a cage. She doesn't really interact with a lot of people, and those that she does interact with are either jealous of her for being like the favored of the king or her guards. That's pretty much it. and sometimes with visiting royals who just want her for themselves. This also is a world where she is threatened with sexual violence so often. And because her skin is gold, they want to dull her shine with bodily functions. And I don't like that. And then the last thing that I read in digital form was Spy X Family, the first volume. It is a very funny, adorable manga that follows a family that was kind of thrown together based on the needs of the spy. So the main first person we meet is the spy, and he needs to infiltrate a children's school because the only time this one particular person that he needs to get information on is ever in the public is when he attends school events for his child. So the spy needs a family in order to get into those events. So he goes to an orphanage and comes across a little girl that they are trying desperately to get rid of because she is just a little otherworldly, and in reality, she can read people's thoughts. So she kind of cons her way into being his daughter because she wants family. She wants to be somewhere that she won't get returned to the orphanage, and she also really likes a show about spies, so she's like, I want to be his kid. Then he realizes that he needs a wife in order to go through the entrance exams, essentially, the entrance interviews for the daughter. And the wife is an assassin, and all three of them are trying to keep what they really are from the others. And it's just a comedy of errors. It's very ridiculous and I love it a lot. So I'll probably continue on with that at some point. And those are the books that I read this month. 23, possibly 24 if I end up finishing More Miracle Than Bird today. And yeah, that's what I read in July. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. Let me know what you read this month, if you read anything that you think that I should definitely pick up. And so I have something that might be happening pretty soon that would be really, really, really exciting. So I'm probably gonna do like a book sale, like a used book sale on Bookstagram. So if you're interested in any of the books that I've mentioned today, follow me at Random Librarians on Instagram and they might be coming up for used book sale prices soon, because yeah, I'll tell you if the thing that I'm hoping will happen, and that will be in the future and very exciting if it does come to pass. So that's all I have for this video. Again, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!